Welcome to the Rap Soul Podcast, where we dive deep into the world of music that moves our hearts and gets our feet tapping. This is the intersection of rap and soul music from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. We appreciate you for listening. Share this podcast with a friend or family member who loves music as much as you do. The podcast is hosted by 12 Kyle. Next up, the Rap Soul Podcast.
The interesting thing about this album was there's a song on this album where T.I. claims and calls himself the King of the South. He laid claim to being the King of the South, not the King of Atlanta, not the King of Fulton County. He said, I'm the King of the South, not the King of Georgia. I'm the King of the South. And what was interesting was nobody refuted his claim. Nobody from Houston, nobody from Atlanta, nobody from Texas, nobody from Miami. And I think that everybody kind of recognized like this guy has something and you couldn't deny it. Trap music is a cold album. It is a very cold album. I love it. I still give it 4 mics. And again, I thought that was interesting that he called himself the King of the South and nobody said, hey, you ain't the king of nothing. Welcome to another edition of the Rap Soul Podcast. I am your boy 12 Kyle. I want to thank you all for tuning in as you do each and every week. Again, this is the Rap Soul Podcast. This is the intersection where we have discussions about music and artists from the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s when it comes to rap, hip hop, soul, and R&B. Simply put, folks, this is the best music podcast that you've never heard until right now. Again, I want to thank you all for tuning in. Shout out to those of you who are watching on YouTube as well as Spotify. Man, check this out. So the other day in one of my group chats, me and a couple of the homies, we were talking about some of the greatest years in hip hop. And somebody mentioned a specific year. And I was like, nah, that year wasn't even close to being one of the greatest years in hip hop. And so the conversation went back and forth. And what it made me think about was, have you ever talked about like, the years that you think are the greatest years in hip hop? And on this on this podcast, I haven't. And when I looked at the flagship station, the 12 Kyle podcast, there was no mention of those years on any episodes there either. So I was like, you know what? That would be a great idea to bring to this podcast. So what I'm going to do in this calendar year of 2026, we're going to count down starting from 12, because why not start at 12? We're going to start at 12 and we're going to count down to number 1. Now, full disclosure, by the time you see this or hear this episode, it will be February. So I'll drop 2 episodes in the month of February. So that way we'll be on track. And so each month I'm going to count down until we get to December, which is the month which your boy was born. And I will give you the greatest year in hip hop. But so, yeah, that's how it's going to go. So just to kind of give you a little brief synopsis, I'll tell you some of the great albums that came out in these particular years, some of the artists who were up and coming, some of the artists who were on the top of the game. And then, obviously the classic, and I use this in quotations, classic albums that dropped in that particular year. So starting off with number 12, we're going to go with the year 2003. Man, I remember 2003 like it was yesterday. 2003 was very influential and very dope in a lot of ways when it came to hip hop. First, let me tell you about some of the people who had what we would call a breakout year. One of the first people I can think of that had a breakout year and had a really, really dope album was a cat coming out of the Rockefeller camp by the name of Freeway. Freeway dropped his debut solo album, Philadelphia Freeway. Really, really dope album. Really dope album. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I've been a fan of Freeway's, and I was a fan from the first time I heard him on 1-900 Hustler on the Dynasty album with Jay-Z. But Freeway did his thing, and he held his own on that album. Again, it's called Philadelphia Freeway. If you haven't heard it, please check it out. Dope, album from Freeway. And again, it was his first album coming out the gate, and he did not disappoint. So he had a breakout year. Another person who had a breakout year was a guy by the name of Jules Santana, or Juel Santana, however you want to pronounce his name. Santana was an integral part of the Dipset, and the Dipset was a group and a movement, if you will. They had an album that particular year called Diplomatic Immunity, and it was a really good album, really good album. And I will say this much about Dipset, and I've said this before: like, while I wasn't fans of them or their music, there was a movement, there was a wave when it came to Dipset, and quite frankly, a lot of people were on that movement and that wave, more than you probably would think. And so those fans that got on that train and that wave with Dipset, they rode it with them and still are riding it with them to this day, even though they don't make music as the Dipset anymore. But nonetheless, Joel Santana was a guy who I think had a breakout year that year as well. And then last but not least, as far as breakout years, an up and comer, a guy who had dropped his sophomore album, a guy out of the city in which I live, Atlanta, GA, my man T.I. T.I. was definitely a breakout star in 2003. He dropped his second album, the follow up to the I'm Serious album, and the second album is called Trap Music. Listen, I think one of the things that stood out to me was that I saw T.I. perform, and I didn't know who he was. I think he had just gotten his record deal, but he didn't have any music out. And I was like, this dude can rap. And he was Atlanta all day, West Side all day. I mean, like, the moment that you heard him talk, you knew exactly where he was from. And so I was surprised at how well he rapped, and he could freestyle. I saw him freestyle outside of Club Kaya one night. Shout out to Club Kaya. And he was in a cypher holding his own. I mean, doing his thing off the dome, freestyling. And he could rap. He was one of those rapping ass rappers. And so little did I know that he would become who he became. But I remember the I'm Serious album. I don't think I bought that, but I think when trap music came out, like after the first single, I was like hooked. I think first song I heard was 24s. Once I heard 24s, I bought the album. But yeah, T.I. had a breakout year as well. Now, when you think about 2003, you have to think about, as I mentioned at the top, who was at their apex, who was on top of their game. Well, a few people come to mind. Eminem, for one. Eminem was at the top of his game. Now, Eminem didn't release a album in 2003, but Eminem arguably was the most popular rapper in the world. Eminem obviously had crossover appeal, but Eminem could rap too. Like, it wasn't, I mean, like, I know a lot of people at that particular time wanted to kind of push him to the side. Oh, he's just a white guy that can rap. It was more than that. Eminem had bars. And I mean, like, this is probably when Eminem was at his highest peak, if you will. So Eminem definitely was at his apex during that time. Who else was at their apex? A guy by the name of 50 Cent. 50 Cent was at his apex, and here's the funny thing. His debut album came out in 2003. So imagine being that hot to where your debut album comes out, and that's when your star is shining the brightest. That's when you're at the top of your game. And he was definitely that at that particular time. And I'll get to 50 Cent a little bit more a little later when I talk about the albums. And then last but not least, who else was at the top of the game? None other than Sean Corey Carter, a.k.a. Jay-Z. As many of you know, in 2003, Jay-Z was set to retire from rap. That's right. He told us that he was retiring from rap and that the album that he was working on would be his last. And it's 2026 and Jay-Z is still rapping to this day. Now, he hasn't made an album in a couple of years, thank God. And I shouldn't say that. But I mean, his last few albums are terrible. But that's beside the point. The point I'm making is that, and I've said this often, rappers don't retire. Like you either stop rapping or you just keep going. Like there's nobody that stopped rap. I mean, like I'm not talking about the rappers who lost their record deals or whatever like that, but nobody says, "Hey, I'm going to retire." Too Short was supposed to retire years ago, never retired. He's probably never going to retire. And Too Short's not someone who has to keep making music, and neither does Jay-Z. But the thing about it is that Jay-Z told us in 2003 that he was retiring, and his album called the Black Album would be his swan song. And it didn't happen. Well, the album came, and I'll talk about that in a few, but Jay-Z didn't retire. And, so the moral of the story is when a rapper tells you that they're going to retire, don't believe them because they're not. All right, now it's time for a quick commercial. On the other side of the break, I'll tell you about some of the essential must have albums, and then I'll tell you about some of the classic albums that dropped in 2003. Sit tight, we'll be back in just a second. And we are back. Once again, it's your boy 12 Kyle. This is the Rap Soul Podcast, and we're talking about the 12 greatest years in hip hop, and we're starting with number 12, and that is the year 2003. Before the break, I gave you some of the breakout stars and the rappers who were on top of the game. And I told you when we came back from the break, we're going to talk about some of the albums that came out that particular year. So one of the, what they call essentials, projects or albums that you had to have, was again, the aforementioned, Philadelphia Freeway. Really, really solid album. I would give that album probably, if I had to give it in microphones, probably a 3.5. It was a really, really dope album. It's an album that I still go back to from time to time. He had a couple of singles on there that were really, really hot. So yeah, definitely, I would definitely give that a 3.5 mic album. Next up, Beg for Mercy by the G Unit. That's right. Beg for Mercy, debut album from the G Unit crew. The G Unit crew was 50 Cent, Lloyd Banks, and Young Buck, and Tony Yayo. I like this album. I really like this album. That album got a lot of play. It was definitely an essential album to cop in 2003. If I had to give it on a microphone scale, I'd probably give that a 3.5 as well. Really, really good album. The aforementioned Diplomatic Immunity from the Dipset. Very, very solid album. Couple of hits. Again, it started a movement, and when you had songs like Dipset Anthem, again, I wasn't a part of it, but I did hear the album. I thought it was a 3.5 as well. Really, really solid album, especially out the gates. Some people may have it higher than that, and that's fine. I'm not a fan of Dipset's music, but I do recognize that Joel Santana was a guy who was coming out, and then also the album was very, very solid. So those were the essentials. Now let's get into the classics. And when I say classic, I don't mean by any stretch of the imagination that these are 5 mic albums, but these are, if people are going to argue about classics that dropped in a particular year, most are going to say that these albums that I'm going to mention are classics. Again, I wouldn't label them as classics because I define classic as something different, but I think there's going to be a case that can be made that these were classics for this particular time. First up, the double album from my boys, Outkast, Speaker Box Love Below. Man, listen, this would be, and we did not know this at the time, but this would be Outkast's last studio album. And I think that this is still their last studio album because honestly, I don't think that Outkast is ever going to get back in the studio as a group, as a unit, as Big Boy and Andre, to make another album. Now, I will say this much before I start talking about Speaker Box Love Below. I'm a huge fan. There's no bigger fan of Outkast than me. And it's interesting because I've mentioned on several podcast episodes that people always ask me, yo, 12 Kyle, do you think Outkast is going to get back in this? And they ask me as if I know Dre and Big Boy. I've met them, but no, I don't know them. So, and here's my theory. Well, we all know Andre 3000 does not want to rap. He said he's done with rapping, and I respect that, right? I think that there's a situation where not only Andre doesn't want to rap again, but my personal thought is that I think Outkast still owes their record label at least one more album. I can't prove it. There's no documentation to uh confirm or deny that claim. Um but I think that they owe them another studio album. And that is the reason why you will not see Dre and Big Boy on a song. So let's say, I don't know, let's say Killer Mike has an album come out. You might have Dre on a track, you might have Big Boy on a track, but you won't have them on the same track because the minute that Big Boy and Dre appear on a track, they are technically Outkast. And so I think the record label has prevented them from recording together. I think Big Boy, if I'm not mistaken, Big Boy had a song that was produced by Dre on one of his albums, one of his solo albums. And you guys know Dre is, doing the flute thing, and that's cool. I heard the flute album. I mean, it was all right, I guess. It was good for sleep, you know what I mean? But um, in all seriousness, Big Boy's done his thing with his solo albums. Um, Outkast at the time of this recording recently went into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so salute to them. But I said all that to say this: I don't think that there's ever going to be another studio album from Outkast as a whole. Maybe we get a solo rapping album from Dre. I doubt it, but it's possible. Big Boy's been making solo records, so. But nonetheless, Speakerbox Love Below was packaged as a double CD. Um, One album was Big Boy and the other album was Dre. And from what I understand, they recorded it, at different times and everything. Of course, they heard it and they threw ideas to each other, but it's just one side Big Boy, one side Andre. And I thought it was a really, really dope album. I gave it 4 mics. Um, it's not my favorite Outkast album, but I love it. Let me just say that. And I don't think at any given time did we think that it was going to be their last, but it's an album that I still go back to from time to time. Um, Really, really dope album. And again, if someone's going to make a claim for a classic from 2003, Speakerbox Love Below is going to be listed. Next album, T.I. Trap Music. T.I., the interesting thing about this album was there's a song on this album where T.I. claims and calls himself the king of the South. He said there's only 5 rappers from Atlanta that's busting, and I'm one of them. And he laid claim to being the king of the South, not the king of Atlanta, not the king of Fulton County. He said, I'm the king of the South, not the king of Georgia. I'm the king of the South. And what was interesting was like nobody refuted his claim. Nobody from Houston, nobody from Atlanta, nobody from Texas, nobody from Miami, nobody from nowhere. And I think that everybody kind of recognized like this guy has something. And you couldn't deny it. I mean, Trap Music is a cold album. It is a very cold album. I love it. I still give it 4 mics. And again, I thought that was interesting that he called himself the king of the South and nobody said, hey, you ain't the king of nothing. But, a dope album. Again, if you have not heard it, go back and take a listen to it. Another album that many will feel was a classic from 2003. That would be Jay-Z's swan song album, and I use quotation marks, the Black Album. The Black Album, if Jay-Z had retired when he made the Black Album, it would have been the equivalent of Jordan hitting the game-winning shot versus Utah and never playing basketball again. Jay-Z at that moment could have walked off into the sunset as the greatest of all time. He didn't, and he kept making music that subsequently wasn't as good, but that's for another day. Subject for another day. Nonetheless, the Black Album, as packaged as his swan song, was a cold album. It's a 4.5 mic album for me. my only knock or gripe about the Black Album was Justify My Thug. I don't think that song has any place on that album. It's not a bad song, but I don't think the song fits with the flow of the album. You take that song off, you probably got a 5 mic album from Jay-Z. Again, great album. I thought he should have retired at that moment, but Jay, can't leave rap alone. The game needs me. He said that himself. So it is what it is. And last but not least, it's very difficult to get a classic album coming out as your first album. But many will make the case that 50 Cent's Get Rich or Die Trying is a classic album. I think it's a 4.5 mic album, but it is cold. And one of the things that we learned early on about Get Rich or Die Trying was that, some of the beats on the album were beats that were shelved by Dr. Dre on his Detox album that never came out. So Detox was the name of an album that Dr. Dre was supposed to be making. And it was supposed to be his follow-up to The Chronic. Well, in between Dre creativity and time passed. Detox never came out. It's never coming out probably. And so word on the street was that he gave some of these beats to 50 Cent. Songs like In the Club. That was supposed to be a beat that was supposed to appear on Dre's Detox album, and it didn't. But yeah, that album, let me just talk a little bit about the significance of that album. That album sparked a star in 50 Cent. But let me take you back. The album comes out, I want to say the first week of February. It's like February 9th or something like that. And at the time that it came out, because here's the thing, kids, albums used to come out on Tuesdays. And so 50 Cent's album was supposed to come out the following Tuesday, right? And they pushed the date up to the 9th, which means I think it came out like on a Thursday. And they did that because they were afraid that the album was going to get bootlegged. So what coincided that particular weekend that 50 Cent's album dropped? The NBA All-Star game. So All-Star Weekend was, depending on where it was, All-Star Weekend was always a blackety black event. Like it was kind of like a version of Super Bowl and All-Star and Freaknik all rolled into one. And that year, the All-Star game, the NBA All-Star game actually took place in my current hometown of Atlanta, Georgia. And so it was interesting because that album comes out on Thursday. We're hanging out Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for All-Star Weekend. And when I tell you, you could not go anywhere in this city without hearing that album. Everybody was playing every song off of that album. I mean, like you could walk 3 blocks and you would hear, if there were 10 cars that passed by you as you were walking, 10 of them had Get Rich or Die Trying, and they all had the windows down and they were blasting it, from 21 Questions to PIMP to Patiently Waiting, Heat, which is my favorite track on the album. And keep in mind, they moved it up as far as the release date so that it wouldn't get bootlegged. And 50 Cent actually ended up selling 872,000 copies of that album from Thursday to Tuesday. Let me say that again. 872,000, the number one album on Billboard, and he sold 800,000 between Thursday and Tuesday. It was crazy. We had never seen, there had not been a buzz for a new artist like that probably since Snoop, when he did Deep Cover and then subsequently came out with Doggy Style. And so, but that was 92, 93, right? So this is 10 years later. And again, 50 Cent is a guy, he had the mixtape scene on lock. Wanksta was like a hit song, and all of this is before his album actually comes out. And so I remember listening to Wanksta, and I'm like, okay, is this guy going to be as good as what we saw in these mixtapes? Because the mixtapes were cold. He had some bars on these mixtapes, and his story, it made people intrigued because you heard he got shot 9 times and he lived to tell about it, and he's this gangster guy, whatever like that. And 50 Cent lived up to the hype. He really did. In fact, he exceeded the hype. And I just remember, hearing about him and then hearing about him getting shot. And he got dropped by his label and he got picked up again. And Eminem found him, and the rest is history. And I just remember, like I said, that particular weekend, All-Star weekend was off the chain. I said if and when All-Star ever comes back to Atlanta, I'm leaving the city because you couldn't go anywhere. I mean, like, if you were on foot or if you were on a motorcycle, you were fine. But if you were in a car, you were in trouble. I mean, like, I remember me and my boy, we went to, shout out to my boy Juan, we went to Lenox Mall. Bruh, it took us 2 hours to get out of the parking lot. The parking lot. I mean, I can't even remember how long we were actually in the mall, but the mall was packed like a club. I don't think we'll ever see those days, but it was a good time. Um, I've never been around a lot of people like that before outside of Freaknik, and it was crazy. But nonetheless, Get Rich or Die Trying defined that particular weekend, and it defined the year 2003. And if people are going to make a claim for a classic, I think a lot of people are going to name Get Rich or Die Trying from 50 Cent, the debut album. So there you have it, folks. Again, I'm going to be counting down each year. Coming in at number 12 is 2003. Stay tuned because, again, we're going to drop new episodes each month, counting down. So we're starting at 12. There'll be number 11. That'll be probably sometime later this month at the time of this recording, and then we'll go from there. If you disagree, feel free to comment wherever you can comment on YouTube and Spotify as well. So that's going to do it for me. Thanks again for checking out this edition of the Rap Soul Podcast. I am your boy 12 Kyle. I will catch you guys next time. 5,000. Yeah.
Thank you for listening. This concludes the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Rap Soul Podcast. You can find the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Follow the podcast on social media. And feel free to continue this discussion on our Reddit page. More importantly, share this podcast with a friend or family member who loves music as much as you do. Until next time, 5,000.